Okay, in the letter from Birmingham Jail, Dr. King uses the 3 appeals to effectively talk the clergymen that he's responding to into something. Okay, he uses a logical appeal, which makes me think, y'all know what my little picture is right there, right? It's a brain, okay? And then you have emotional appeal, which touches the heart, and then you have ethical appeal, which means he's speaking in a way that makes him believable, okay, credible, trustworthy, intelligent. Okay, we're going to read a short part of the letter from the 8 white clergymen from Birmingham, Alabama, that wrote him a letter expressing their concern that he was stirring up too much trouble, okay? So let's read a portion of that right now. The first thing I want you to notice is that these clergymen are from many different denominations and men of the church, okay? So that's what a clergyman is. And they called they wrote this letter and they called it a call for unity, and they published it in Birmingham, Alabama as an open letter to the whole community, but it was written basically to Dr. King and his followers. And they wrote it and published it on April 12th, 1963. And this was their response to his civil rights demonstrations taking place in the area. The Bishop of Alabama, I'm almost thinking that's Catholic, okay? Joseph Durek, another bishop, has to be Catholic, or I don't know, there are different bishops. You'll see Rabbi of Temple of Emmanuel it's a synagogue, so he's a Jewish rabbi. And then you have another bishop of the Methodist Church, another bishop of the Episcopal Church, a representative from the Presbyterian Church, and then there's the pastor of the First Baptist Church there in Birmingham, Alabama. So this covers a wide range of different religions. I'd like you to read this first part of their letter. Let's read it aloud, and then I want you to talk about what you think it means. Okay, let's read it aloud. However, we are now confronted by a series of demonstrations by some of our Negro citizens, directed and led in part by outsiders. We recognize the natural impatience of people who feel that their hopes are slow in being realized, but we are convinced that these demonstrations are unwise and untimely. Okay, like if you had to tell me in like 2 or 3 bulleted notes, like little fragments, what's going on, discuss with your partner right now beside you what you think the white clergymen are basically telling Martin Luther King. Discuss that with your partner right now. So we don't like outsiders, basically, is what they're saying. They're calling MLK an outsider. And we understand that the white people are saying, we understand your impatience, but disagree with the tactics. Okay, we think that everything's fine here in Birmingham, and it will slowly change.
Now read the next passage and see if you understand what it means, and we'll take notes.
Basically saying, just butt out. We can handle this. We know the situation better than you do in our own city. We don't need your leadership in our town. You're only causing problems. We further strongly urge our own Negro community to withdraw support from these demonstrations and to unite locally in working peacefully for a better Birmingham. When rights are consistently denied, a cause should be pressed in the courts and in negotiations among local leaders, not in the streets. We appeal to both our white and Negro citizenry to observe the principles of law and order and common sense. Okay, talk with your partner and say, in a nutshell, what is he saying? Call on someone. Why? I mean, who agrees that they're saying handle these problems in the courts? Raise your hand if you think that's what he said. Okay, but why is that not working? I mean, it's obviously they've got lots of problems in Birmingham. Why is the court way of handling it not working?
Because, like, if the court handles it, then they're always going to agree with what the white people have to say instead of the black. So
very good. Okay, let me ask you this. Do you know who a jury is made up of? Like, how do you get picked on a jury back then? They go to people who voted, and the people who voted are eligible for jury duty. Did y'all know that? Nowadays they do it differently because not everyone goes to vote, but they still make you go in and do jury duty. They ask people to. They choose you randomly, but it's from the pool of people who voted. How many people do you think voted back then that were black?
not all
Not very many. So you see how the jury pool was very much white, or almost always white. Did you know that they would have different ways of not letting people sign up to vote? They'd say you have to be able to read this test and pass the test in order to vote, and they get to decide which test they give you. Did you know that? Like they could give a black person a really hard test, and they could give the white person, what country do you live in? United States. Okay, you pass, go, you can sign up. But they'd give the black person like a 30-question test, which no one could pass, not even a government teacher. Did y'all know that? We're going to look at one of those later on, okay? So do you see how handling it in the courts really wasn't that a very fair option? Okay, they had lots of problems. Okay, let's write down this answer. They're basically telling the black people, don't march with our MLK. He's an unpeaceful instigator. And we need to work it out in the courts, which is just common sense, you know, law and order and common sense. Do y'all agree? Now we can see where the white clergymen, these are men of God, were coming from, telling the people of Birmingham, don't get involved with this instigator, this outsider MLK and all his other leaders. I wish I would have looked up to see how Dr. King was jailed. I'm sure it was for protesting in the streets, okay? So they put him in jail, and he was there for a number of days. He had lots of time to respond to this white open letter that was published in the newspaper, this open letter, you know, telling the citizens of Birmingham not to join with him. So he responds to him, and here's what he says. My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling for my present activities unwise and untimely. So he's going to address how these activities are not unwise and untimely. Seldom do I pause to answer criticism of my work and ideas. If I sought to answer all the criticisms that cross my desk, my secretaries would have little time for anything other than such correspondence in the course of a day, and I would have no time for constructive work. So he's basically saying it's pretty special that I'm responding to your little letter, because I don't usually respond to criticism or I would get nothing done. But since I feel that you are men of genuine good, what's he doing here? He's conceding. He's losing a battle in order to win a war. Do you understand that? Okay. Genuine goodwill, and that your criticisms are sincerely set forth. I want to try to answer your statement in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. So write concession down there. That's really important. I think I should indicate why I am here in Alabama, since you have been influenced by the view which argues against outsiders coming in. I have the honor, so he's establishing why he's not an outsider. Watch this. I have the honor of serving as president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Do you think Southern would include Birmingham, Alabama?
Yes.
Yeah. An organization operating in every southern state with headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. We have some 85 affiliated organizations across the South, and one of them is the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights. Frequently, we share staff, educational, and financial resources with our affiliates. Several months ago, the affiliate here in Birmingham asked us to be on call to engage in a nonviolent direct action program if such were deemed necessary. We readily consented, and when the hour came, we lived up to our promise. So I, along with several members of my staff, am here because I was invited here. I am here because I have organizational ties here. More basically, I am in Alabama because injustice is here. That should be reason enough, right? Just as the prophets of the 8th century BC left their villages and carried their "Thus saith the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the Apostle Paul left his village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so am I compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my own hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid. The definition of concession, basically you lose a little battle to win the big war. Plus it also helps butter them up a little bit. When you concede, it means that they start thinking, well, at least he's got enough sense to say I'm right about that, and so maybe they start listening better to your argument. or it helps them realize that you are listening to them and that you are understanding the situation and that you're not completely unreasonable. But after you concede, then you assert your own. You refute. You assert your own I misspelled opponent. What's wrong with opponent? O-P-P-O-N-E-N-T. I'll go fix that. Arguments are wrong and arguing against them.
The yellow part up there is King's concession. Please underline that and label it. And then the clergyman's concession is right there as well. We recognize the natural impatience of people. That whole sentence there is their concession. Okay, now I need you to underline or circle number 2 and tell why King refutes the assertion that he's an outsider. What does he say up here that reveals that he's really not an outsider?
Number 3, circle it as well. He also compares himself to the biblical characters of the Apostle Paul and the prophets, which might ethically appeal to the clergymen because, now let's talk for just a moment about the Apostle Paul. Does anyone know who the Apostle Paul is? In the New Testament, okay, now here's the deal. There's one Jewish clergyman on this, okay, so he might not believe in the New Testament and the Apostle Paul, but he does believe in the minor prophets because that's the Old Testament. So King's pretty smart. He uses a New Testament biblical character and he uses the Old Testament biblical characters, okay? So the Apostle Paul, let's talk about him first. The Apostle Paul was originally named Saul. Do you know that? And he was on his way to persecute more Christians, and he was blinded by a light, and he went in, and he was completely blind and went to this home, and there God spoke to him and said, you're wrong, Saul. You should not be persecuting Christians. You need to be working with them. And then God gave him his sight back, and he became a Christian. Okay, so the Apostle Paul, after that, all he did was say, I'm sorry for killing Christians. He really did kill Christians. He would stone them. And then he became a Christian, and he said, no, he started preaching the gospel instead. So the Apostle Paul would go places and talk about God and Jesus, and he wasn't always invited. Do you understand what I'm saying? He wasn't always welcome by some of the people in those cities. Now, let's talk about the minor prophets. God asked these sweet, nice minor prophet people to go to such and such town and tell them they're being sinful. Do you think they liked that job? You think they were real popular? No, these poor minor prophets, I mean, they would arrive and people would throw rocks at them. They didn't want to hear from them what God was telling them, about their city being sinful. And so what do both of these characters have in common? They were really not wanted places, right? They were presenting a message where they weren't wanted. Why are they like King? What was King doing, Anna?
He was going to a place where people didn't want to hear about.
Yeah, they didn't want to hear about civil rights. The black people did, but the white people didn't want them there, changing the way they did things, the way they rode on buses, the way they ran their restaurants. They didn't want some outsider coming in and telling them, that things needed to be better. Okay, now let's do this. He compares himself to these Bible characters, to clergymen, which might ethically appeal to these clergymen. Why would that be appealing, Will?
Because they're really religious.
They're religious. What do they believe in?
God.
The Bible and God. So if he's using examples from the Bible where people had to sometimes go deliver a message that wasn't really welcome, could the clergyman really argue? So go ahead and write your answer. Write your answer for number 3. Okay, when you finish number 3, let's turn to the next page. And I'm going to go ahead and start reading right now this next part of King's letter. In any non-violent campaign, there are 4 basic steps: the collection of the facts to determine whether injustices exist, negotiation, self-purification, and direct action. We have gone through all of these steps in Birmingham. There can be no gainsaying the fact that racial injustice engulfs this community. There's no one that can argue that there isn't racial injustice in Birmingham, okay? Number 1, write a little number 1 right there. Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. What does that mean, segregated?
Separated by
Split.
skin color.
exactly, India. There's a white theater, there's a black theater. There's a white school, there's a black school. There's a white section on the bus, there's a black section on the bus. Number 2, write that down. Its ugly record of brutality is widely known. How brutal they are for anybody that tries to, create civil rights, who tries to argue against them. And then number 3, Negroes have experienced grossly unjust treatment in the courts. And number 4, there have been more unresolved bombings of Negro homes and churches in Birmingham than any other city in the nation. Amazing. These are hard, brutal facts of the case. On the basis of these conditions, Negro leaders sought to negotiate with the city fathers, but the latter consistently refused to engage in good faith negotiations. So the actual people that lived in Birmingham tried to talk to the white people about these problems, and nothing happened. They wouldn't listen. So what is King basically doing? He's saying, your city leaders tried, so now what's about to happen is I'm here to help out in the situation. Okay, write down the 4 facts. You have 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Summarize them next to fact, fact, fact. There's 4 spaces for 4 facts. Write down the 4 facts that he presents, logically presents to them, that says, hey, these are the facts. We've tried. Nothing has changed. Actually, not we have tried, but the city leaders have tried, so now we're here to help. Okay, now that we finished that part of the packet, just come to class ready to start right there tomorrow. We're going to continue and look at what else Dr. King has to say in his letter from Birmingham Jail. Thanks.